That frozen night in Chicago, all I wanted was to disappear among the flickering lights of Union Station. But fate had other plans for me. My name is Luke, and I'm about to tell you the story of how I lost everything I thought mattered, only to find something I never knew I was looking for. 3 hours earlier, I had been sitting in a glass conference room on the 32nd floor of the Sears Tower, watching my boss Harold slide a termination letter across the mahogany table. 6 years of my life, 6 years of 60-hour weeks, missed family dinners, and cancelled vacations, all reduced to a single sheet of corporate letterhead. The reason: budget cuts, they said. Nothing personal, they said. But when you've given your soul to a company, when your identity is wrapped up in your job title and your corner office, everything feels personal. I remember staring at Harold's thin lips as he delivered the rehearsed speech about transitions and opportunities, but all I could hear was the sound of my world crashing down. The promotion I'd been promised for 2 years, the apartment lease I'd just renewed, the engagement ring I'd been saving for, all of it suddenly felt like a cruel joke. Sarah had been patient, so patient, waiting for me to propose, waiting for me to have time for us, waiting for a future that now seemed as distant as the stars. The security guard escorted me out like a common criminal, my personal belongings stuffed into a cardboard box that felt heavier than it should have. 28 years old, and I was walking out of that building feeling like my life was over. The October wind cut through my suit jacket as I stood on the sidewalk, watching people hurry past with purpose while I had none. The city that had once felt like my kingdom now felt like a prison. I started walking without direction, my dress shoes clicking against the wet pavement. The Chicago streets blurred together as I wandered through the loop, past the restaurants where I used to take clients, past the bar where my colleagues and I would celebrate closed deals. Everything looked the same, but everything felt different. I was no longer part of this world. I was just another ghost haunting the streets of downtown. Hours passed before I found myself at Union Station. The Grand Hall echoed with the sounds of travelers and announcements, people rushing to catch trains to somewhere important. I sat on a wooden bench, watching families embrace and business travelers check their phones, and I felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was surrounded by hundreds of people, yet I might as well have been invisible. The departure board showed the last train to the suburbs, leaving at 11:47 p.m. I checked my watch, 11:45. I should have run. Should have pushed through the crowd and made it to the platform, but something held me back. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the realization that I didn't really have anywhere to go. My apartment felt like a monument to my failures, and I couldn't bear the thought of Sarah's questions, her concerned looks, her attempts to fix what couldn't be fixed. I watched the board change, 11:47 p.m. Departed. The last train had left without me, just like everything else in my life seemed to be leaving. I felt my chest tighten, my breathing become shallow. This wasn't just about missing a train. This was about missing everything, missing the life I thought I was building, missing the man I thought I was, missing the future I thought was guaranteed. The station began to empty as midnight approached. The food courts closed their metal gates, the shops dimmed their lights, and slowly the Grand Hall transformed from a bustling hub into a cathedral of echoes. I remained on my bench, my cardboard, the box beside me like a faithful dog, and I let the silence wash over me. This was rock bottom, I thought. This was what it felt like to have nothing left to lose. That's when I noticed him. An elderly man in a worn security uniform, making his rounds with a flashlight and a ring of keys that jangled softly as he walked. He must have been in his 70s, with silver hair and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of decades of night shifts and early mornings. He moved with the deliberate pace of someone who had learned that rushing rarely solved anything. He noticed me sitting there, and approached with the kind of gentle authority that comes from years of dealing with lost souls in train stations. "Station's closing soon, son," he said, his voice carrying a slight southern drawl. "Last train's already gone." "I know," I replied, not looking up from my hands. "I missed it." He studied me for a moment, taking in my rumpled suit, my cardboard box of office supplies, the defeat written across my face. "Rough day?" he asked, settling onto the bench beside me with a grunt. I almost laughed at the understatement. "You could say that." The old security guard introduced himself as Frank, and something about his weathered face and patient eyes made me want to talk. Maybe it was the anonymity of confessing to a stranger, or maybe it was just the desperate need to say the words out loud, to make my situation real by speaking it into existence. I told him about the job, about Harold's cold dismissal, about the 6 years of sacrifice that meant nothing in the end. Frank listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or making a small sound of understanding. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against his knee. "Been working these night shifts for 15 years, Frank," finally said, his eyes fixed on the empty departure board. "You see all kinds of people come through here, businessmen like yourself, running to catch trains to meetings they think will change their lives, families heading home after vacations they'll remember forever, students going back to school, full of dreams and debt." He chuckled softly. "And then you see the others, the ones who missed their trains, literally or figuratively." I looked at him, curious despite my misery. What happens to them? Depends, Frank said, pulling a thermos from his belt and unscrewing the cap. The smell of black coffee filled the air between us. Some of them spend all night cursing the train, cursing the schedule, cursing everyone but themselves. They sit right here on this bench, getting angrier and more bitter with each passing hour. He took a sip of coffee and offered me the thermos. Others realized something important. I accepted the coffee gratefully, letting the warmth spread through my hands. What's that? That the train doesn't make the journey. The person does. His words hit me strangely, like a key turning in a lock I didn't know existed. I'm not sure I follow. Frank leaned back against the bench, his uniform jacket creaking softly. My daddy used to work the railroads back in Alabama. Spent 40 years laying track, fixing signals, keeping those trains running on time. He used to tell me that the most important lesson he learned wasn't about trains at all. It was about control. Control. See, my daddy could control the condition of the tracks, the timing of the signals, the maintenance of the equipment, but he couldn't control the weather, the passengers, or whether the train would arrive on schedule every single day. He learned to focus on what he could control and let go of what he couldn't. I stared into the dark coffee, seeing my reflection waver in the surface. It sounds simple when you put it like that. Simple, yes. Easy, no. Frank's voice carried the weight of experience. I've been watching you sit here for 2 hours, son, and I can see you're carrying the weight of the whole world on your shoulders. But here's what I've learned in my 73 years. You can't control what other people do to you, but you can control what you do with it. The station grew quieter around us, the only sounds being the distant hum of cleaning equipment and the occasional echo of footsteps. I found myself thinking about Harold's face as he delivered my termination, about the satisfaction I saw in his eyes. I'd been replaying that moment over and over, each time making myself angrier, more resentful, more defeated. You know what the funny thing is? I said, surprised by the sound of my own voice. I hated that job. I mean, really hated it. The politics, the backstabbing, the way they treated people like numbers on a spreadsheet. But I stayed because I thought it defined me. I thought leaving would make me a failure. Frank nodded slowly. And now I've been fired, and I still feel like a failure. I laughed bitterly. So I guess I was trapped either way. Or maybe, Frank said gently, you've been freed either way. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. I wanted to argue with him, to explain why he was wrong, why my situation was different, why losing my job was the worst thing that could have happened. But something deep inside me, a voice I'd been ignoring for years, whispered that maybe he was right. I was going to propose to my girlfriend, I said suddenly. Sarah. We've been together for 4 years, and she's been waiting for me to get my act together, to get the promotion, to be worthy of her. Now what do I tell her? That I'm unemployed, that I can't provide for her? Frank turned to look at me directly, his eyes serious. Son, let me ask you something. Does this Sarah of yours love you for your job title, or does she love you for who you are? The question hit me like a physical blow. I don't know. I mean, she says she loves me, but you don't believe you're worth loving without the fancy office and the steady paycheck. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, a sensation I hadn't experienced in years. Maybe not then. That's the real problem, isn't it? Not Harold, not the job, not the missed train. The problem is that you've forgotten who you are when you're not wearing that suit and sitting behind that desk. The truth of his words cut through me like a blade. For 6 years I'd been Luke the account executive, Luke the rising star, Luke the workaholic. I'd defined myself entirely by external measures, my salary, my title, my office location, the respect of colleagues who probably didn't even like me. Strip all that away, and what was left? I don't know who I am without all of that, I admitted, the words coming out as barely a whisper. Frank's expression softened. Well then, son, maybe that's what you're supposed to figure out. The old man stood up slowly, his joints protesting the movement. He checked his watch and started to move away, then turned back to me. Station opens again at 5 a.m. Trains start running at 5:30. You've got about 4 hours to sit with yourself, really sit with yourself, maybe for the first time in years. He paused, studying my face in the dim light. You know what? I think you didn't miss that train by accident. I think you needed to be right here, right now, having this conversation. Sometimes the universe has to stop us in our tracks before we can find our way. As Frank's footsteps echoed away into the darkness, I was left alone with his words and the weight of my own thoughts. For hours until the train started running again. For hours to figure out who Luke really was beneath all the corporate armor I'd been wearing. I spent the next hour in a kind of emotional freefall. Frank's words echoing in my mind like stones dropped into a deep well. The station had become a tomb of silence, broken only by the distant sounds of maintenance crews and the occasional rumble of freight trains passing through the yards. I found myself really looking at my surroundings for the first time, noticing details I'd missed in my self-absorbed haze. The architecture of Union Station told its own story of endurance and purpose. These walls had witnessed millions of arrivals and departures. Countless stories of love and loss, hope and despair. How many other people had sat on this exact bench, facing their own crossroads? How many had found their way forward, and how many had remained trapped in the prison of their own expectations? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, stopping at Sarah's name. My finger hovered over the call button, but I couldn't bring myself to press it. What would I say? How could I explain that the man she'd been waiting for, the successful executive with the bright future, was sitting in an empty train station at 2 in the morning, holding a box of desk accessories and questioning everything he'd ever believed about himself? The thought of Sarah brought a fresh wave of pain, but also something else, clarity. I realized I'd been so focused on becoming the man I thought she deserved that I'd never asked her what she actually wanted. I'd assumed she needed financial security, a house in the suburbs, a husband who could provide for her in the way society said a man should. But when I thought about our best moments together, they had nothing to do with my job or my income. I remembered the night we'd gotten caught in a thunderstorm during a weekend trip to Michigan. We'd taken shelter in a small diner, and while we waited for the storm to pass, we'd talked for hours about everything and nothing. She'd laughed at my terrible jokes, shared her dreams of becoming a teacher, and told me about her childhood in Wisconsin. In that moment, she wasn't looking at Luke, the executive. She was looking at just Luke, and she'd seemed perfectly happy with what she saw. The realization hit me like a physical force. I'd been so busy trying to become worthy of love that I'd forgotten I might already be worthy just as I was. The job, the money, the status, they were all external validations I'd been using to fill a void that could only be filled from within. As the hours passed, I found myself thinking about my father, who'd died when I was 22. He'd been a high school teacher, never made much money, but he'd been respected by his students and loved by his family. I'd been so focused on not following in his footsteps, on proving I could be more successful than he'd ever been, that I'd lost sight of what had made him truly successful: his integrity, his kindness, his ability to find meaning in his work regardless of the paycheck. The irony was crushing. In my pursuit of what I thought was a better life, I'd abandoned the values that had actually made life worth living. I'd become someone my father wouldn't have recognized, someone I didn't even like very much. Around 4 in the morning, something inside me finally broke. Not broke like something damaged, but broke like a dam bursting, releasing years of suppressed emotion. I started crying, really crying, for the first time since my father's funeral. I cried for the years I'd wasted chasing other people's definitions of success. I cried for the relationships I'd neglected, the dreams I'd abandoned, the person I'd lost along the way. But as the tears fell, something else emerged, a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't performing for anyone. I wasn't trying to be impressive or successful or worthy. I was just a man sitting on a bench facing the wreckage of his carefully constructed life. And somehow that felt more honest than anything I'd done in the past 6 years. When the crying, it stopped, I felt empty but also strangely light, like I'd been carrying a weight I hadn't even realized was there. I looked at my cardboard box of office supplies and almost laughed. A stapler, some pens, a coffee mug with the company logo, a few framed certificates of achievement. This was what I'd thought defined my worth. These meaningless objects. As dawn began to creep through the station's windows, painting everything in soft shades of gold and pink, I made a decision. I wasn't going to define myself by Harold's opinion of me, or by society's expectations, or even by my own past mistakes. I was going to start over. Not as Luke the failed executive, but as Luke the human being. Flawed and uncertain, but finally authentic. The first commuter trains began to arrive, and with them came the familiar sounds of a station coming back to life. I stood up, my legs stiff from sitting for so long, and walked toward the information desk. A young woman in a station uniform was setting up for the day, and she looked up with a practiced smile. "Can I help you, sir?" "Actually," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded, "I'm wondering if you know whether the station is hiring. I'm looking for work." She looked at me curiously, taking in my rumpled suit and cardboard box. "What kind of work?" "Anything. Honest," I replied, and meant it. Maintenance, cleaning, security. I just want to be useful. She directed me to a maintenance supervisor named Miguel who was just starting his shift. Miguel was a stocky man with kind eyes and hands that showed the evidence of decades of hard work. He looked at me with open curiosity when I explained my situation. "You sure about this?" he asked. "It's not glamorous work. Early hours, physical labor, not much pay." "I'm sure," I said, and I was. I've had glamorous work. It didn't make me happy. Miguel studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "We've got an opening for a custodial position. Night shift, mostly. You'd be working with Frank, the security guard. Good man. Knows the station better than anyone." The cosmic joke of it wasn't lost on me. Frank, the man who'd helped me find my way in the darkness, would be my colleague, my guide into this new chapter of my life. I thought about the irony of it all. I'd come to the station as a failed executive, and I was leaving as a janitor, but somehow I felt more successful than I had in years. I called Sarah that afternoon, sitting in my apartment surrounded by the remnants of my old life. When I told her about the job, about my decision to start over from the bottom. She was quiet for a long time. "Luke," she said finally, "I've been waiting for you to come back to yourself for years. The man I fell in love with wasn't the one who worked 14-hour days and talked about quarterly reports at dinner. He was the one who used to read poetry to me and dream about traveling the world and believe that work should mean something beyond just making money." She paused, and I could hear her smile through the phone. "I think I'm going to like getting to know him again." 3 months later, I'm writing this story during my break at Union Station. I mop floors, empty trash cans, and clean bathrooms, and I've never been more at peace with my work. I make a fraction of what I used to make, but I sleep better at night. I have time for Sarah, time for books, time for the things that actually matter. Frank and I have become good friends. He's teaching me chess during our quiet hours, and I'm helping him write letters to his grandchildren. We often talk about control, about the difference between what we can change and what we must. Except, it's a lesson I'm still learning. But at least now I'm learning it consciously. Sometimes former colleagues from my old job pass through the station, and I see them rushing to catch trains to meetings that will determine their quarterly bonuses. They don't recognize me in my custodial uniform, and I don't mind. I've learned that invisibility can be a gift, that there's dignity in honest work regardless of how the world values it. The last midnight train still runs through Union Station, carrying passengers to their destinations across the Midwest. But I've learned that the most important journeys aren't the ones that take us from place to place. They're the ones that take us from who we thought we had to be to who we actually are. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is missing the train you thought you needed to catch. Sometimes getting lost is the only way to find your way home. Stoic principles. Present in the story 1. The dichotomy of control of the principle. Some things are within our power, while others are not. Within our power are opinion, motivation, desire, aversion, and, in a word, whatever is of our own doing. Not within our power are our body, our property, reputation, position, and, in a word, whatever is not of our own doing. Epic. The story. Frank teaches Luke through the railroad metaphor. His father controlled track maintenance and signals, but not the weather or passengers. Luke learns he cannot control Harold's decision to fire him, but he can control how he responds to that situation. Practical application. Stop wasting energy trying to control the uncontrollable others' opinions, external events, and focus on what's truly in your hands, your actions, attitudes, and choices. Closing parenthesis. 2. Amor fati, love of fate, the principle. Don't demand that things happen as you wish, rather wish that they happen as they do happen, and you will go on well. Epictetus in the story. Luke initially fights against his termination, but gradually learns to accept and even embrace this change as an opportunity to rediscover who he really is. Practical application. Instead of resisting difficulties, look for the lessons and opportunities they bring. What seems like a tragedy today might be tomorrow's blessing. 3. External indifference, the principle. Wealth, fame, and power are indifference. They are neither good nor bad in themselves. What matters is how we use them and how we relate to them. Stoic philosophy in the story. Luke realizes that his executive title, high salary, and 32nd floor office didn't make him truly happy or valuable as a person. His father, a simple teacher, had a more meaningful life despite earning less money. Practical application. Don't define your worth by material possessions, social status, or external approval. These things can be lost at any moment, but your character and integrity remain with you. 4. Virtue as the only true good, the principle. Virtue is the only true good because it's the only thing that cannot be taken from us and that always contributes to our well-being. Marcus Aurelius in the story. Luke finds more satisfaction and peace working as a janitor with integrity than as an executive being dishonest with himself. He chooses any honest work instead of seeking another prestigious job. Practical application. Prioritize doing the right thing over doing the easy or profitable thing. Integrity, honesty, and kindness bring lasting satisfaction that money cannot buy. 5. The present as the only real moment, the principle. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius in The Story, The 4 Hours. Luke spends at the station force him to stop running from himself and face his emotions in the present moment. It's in this state of presence that he finds clarity. Practical application. Stop living in the past regrets or the future anxieties. The only life you can truly live is the one happening right now. 6. Growth. Through adversity, the principle. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Marcus Aurelius in The Story. The termination that seemed to be the end of Luke's career becomes the catalyst for him to discover a more authentic and satisfying life. Practical application. See obstacles as disguised teachers. Ask yourself, what is this difficult situation trying to teach me, and how can I grow through this experience? Why these principles work. They are universal. They apply to anyone, at any time, regardless of religion or culture. They are practical. They offer concrete tools for dealing with real problems. They are time-tested. They have been developed and refined for over 2,000 years. They focus on what matters. They direct our attention to what we can actually influence, how to apply in your life. Daily exercise. Before going to sleep, ask yourself, what did I try to control today that was outside my control? How can I better accept circumstances I cannot change? What virtues did I practice today? Courage, justice, wisdom, self-control. How can I focus more on the present and less on the past or future? Remember, the goal is not to become insensitive or passive, but to develop the wisdom to distinguish between what we can and cannot control, and the courage to act appropriately in both cases. Luke's story shows us that sometimes we need to lose what we thought we wanted to find what we really need. Stoic principles don't promise a life without problems, but they offer a path to a meaningful life, regardless of external circumstances.